Hi, everybody. David Nour back with you for another Sales Communities Tech Sales Insight Live. The table's a little turned this time because I'm with my co-host, Randy Seidl. Hello, Randy.
Hey, Nour, how you doing? You ready for this?
Great. I noticed there's only two of us on the screen, so I guess I'm in the hot seat for this session.
Yep, absolutely. Definitely looking forward to turning the tables and interviewing you and having you share some of your fantastic insights about curvebenders and a lot of your research and things that you found.
Well, I appreciate you having me. For our audience, if you haven't had a chance, Randy and I did a podcast this morning. So check that out at salescommunity.com/podcast. And in this session, I'm really excited. This is book number 11. It'll actually won't be released till next Tuesday. But I thought Randy and I would give the sales community an early glimpse into some of the ideas and go from there. So Randy, over to you.
All right, great. All right, we'll sit back and relax. And anybody that is on, feel free to post any questions, and we'll do our best to get to them and answer them. So start off from the very beginning. What is a curvebender? Where did the idea come from?
Sure. So it's very easy to think, and I'm being asked, was this a COVID moment for you? I actually started writing this book 4 years ago. And as you know, this is year 20 of my practice. Randy, my passion and my wheelhouse is this idea of how to be more intentional, how to be more strategic, how to be more quantifiable in the business relationships you invest in. So think of a contact that you invest in, you add value, you exchange value with, that becomes a relationship. Take a few of those relationships and really elevate them such that they really push you to think beyond your own capabilities, your own limitations, your own latent talent. And those I call strategic relationships. Take a few of those, and beyond their help on your execution, performance, and results, Randy, curvebenders are relationships that profoundly shape the managers, the leaders, the human beings that we become. So I'm reminded that in our past episodes, I may have asked you, or we certainly have asked some of our other guests, was there a piece of coaching or a tip you got years ago that had a profound impact on you? You brought up Bill Campbell. You've brought up Dick Egan from EMC. Those are the relationships that I call curvebenders in this book.
No. And was there any kind of encounters or specific experiences that came up that you said, hey, wow, hit you across the head and, hey, I got to do this?
Like many, I think of who's shaped me, right? So in full disclosure, I'm 53. I've been thinking a lot of, I know, right? I tell my kids I used to have more hair. So I've been thinking a lot about the future of our work, right? So what will the next decade look like in how you and I work, and how do we do what we do? And all the research that we did led to even more disruption in the next decade. Think of technology. Think of all the tech that not only we see and we use, but think of geopolitical, think of climate, think of all these forces that are all around us. So if there's constant disruption, what I'm always curious about is how will you and I remain relevant? Well, the answer I came up with is a growth mindset, a digital mindset, and an entrepreneurial one. So we got to think like owners. I don't care who sends you that paycheck, who's on your business card. You have to think and act like an owner of your own journey, owner of your own career, owner of your own book of business and your relationships. So to learn, to grow, I believe certain relationships will accelerate that reinvention. You're a very different leader today than you were 10 years ago. So who's impacted and who's continued to shape that? I've met Donatelli. I've met Meg Whitman. I've met others that I believe have had an impact on you. Similarly, who are the relationships that are going to impact the next 10 years of our lives? That's what got me curious about and researching and interviewing over 100 interviews and writing this book, including several of the sales community members.
Yeah. It's funny you said, think like an owner. Dick Egan, Jack Egan, Roger Marino, Mike Ruckers, early on at EMC. That was probably one of 5 mantras, which was, okay, think like an owner. You're trying to decide what's good for the company. What should you do? And I think that, kind of empowerment a lot of times gets lost on people that are, only at big companies that are used to being told, as opposed to kind of leading and rolling best practices and doing things on their own.
And I remember you saying, I think it was Dick Egan, that everybody sells. I love that, right?
Yeah.
Everybody should be selling in a company, because until we sell something, not much happens in the rest of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody's familiar with kind of work-life balance, but I think you've got a great spin on it with your work-life blending.
Yeah, one of the maybe painful, maybe delightful, depending on your scenario, lessons we've learned through this pandemic is, I think work-life balance for a long time has been a struggle for a lot of people, right? I don't know about you. While I'm on vacation, I'm thinking about the work that's piling up. And while I'm working, I'm like, I'd rather be on vacation. So how do you deal with that conflict? Well, what I thought of is, what this pandemic has maybe forced us, maybe helped us do is, listen, I love having lunch with my wife. So during the day, I'd rather go do that. And I want to take my dogs for a walk. Now I'll come back to work, after maybe kids go to bed, and I'll catch up on email. Or, for years, I was a Boy Scout leader. If I wanted to leave on Monday afternoon and go be a Scout leader, I did that. But I still used maybe my weekends or Saturday to really get caught up on work. So instead of thinking you have a work life and a personal life, you got to change the mindset that you have one life. Employers want the best version of you, the holistic version of you. And yet you got to find ways to disengage. You got to find ways to really, I say, immerse in digital detox, right? You and I love technology. We've been blessed.
Yeah.
We've done really well through it. But we all need escape. You ski, I ride motorcycles. That's our chance to just get away from it.
Exactly. Yes. Yours probably a little bit more dangerous or risky than.
I don't know. I've seen you ski.
To know about that. Anyway, so would you say, I'm sure that this whole concept of work-life blending will probably be more of the norm post-COVID than it was pre-COVID?
Absolutely. And I got to tell you, right now I'm struggling because I believe a lot of leaders are thinking about this idea of coming back to work completely wrong. Most are thinking, should we come back 2 days a week or 3 days a week? Yeah. You're missing the opportunity. This is a chance to reimagine work, rethink what that looks like. Are you after output or are you after outcomes? Because last time I checked, outcomes create enterprise value. Output is just busy work. And how many times you and I have seen people confuse vibration with forward motion? So when you give people a chance to blend their personal aspirations with their professional obligations, you're going to have happier people. You're going to have more motivated people. You're going to have people that, as we've all witnessed the last 14 months, actually tend to work more, tend to commit more to getting the work done, but they're not dealing with the commutes. And they're not dealing with all the stuff that just drove most of us crazy in the pre-pandemic world.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, really be almost a customized hybrid approach, right? For individuals and works. And
by the way, if I can work from anywhere, why can't I work from the beach? Do you really care where I am, right? And think of the quality of life that I'll have if I'm not paying in the high rent district, or if I'm not sitting in my car commuting for an hour and a half into an office every day.
Yeah. And it'll probably force companies too to be probably more objective in terms of the specific metrics and results of what they want. So eliminating some of the, busy work type metrics and, trying to nail it down to those productivity metrics, right?
You've lived this. That's exactly right. You've lived this for a long time, but you'd be amazed of how many executives I'm coaching of, listen, we've got to align talent with value creation. So what are the jobs to be done in that role? Forget the person for a second. Yeah. What are the jobs to be done in that role that's going to create the greatest value? Do you care if that's done in 4 hours or 14? Right? Or where it's done from? No. What I care about is the outcome. So you're exactly right. It's a chance to recalibrate, maybe tighten the aperture on what's the biggest outcome? What's the biggest value creation from that BDR, from that account rep, from that channel manager that we want to focus on?
Yep. Now, changing gears here, I love your concept and emphasis on nonlinear growth in the book. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I'm hoping the audience that's watching maybe will go along with this little exercise. I drew this for somebody else yesterday, and if you can see my screen, I want you to think of this kind of personal S-curve. Yeah. This S-curve is about reinvention. This S-curve is about not just remaining relevant, but accelerating your relevant. At the bottom tip of that S is the first stage where you're investing. You're investing time, you're investing capabilities, you're investing capital, in essence, resources to learn something, learn a new job. Whenever you and I go in a new job, first we try to figure out where the coffee is, right? And then figure out what talent do we have, what are the big challenges, opportunities, so on and so forth. The second stage is as you start coming up that S, you're hitting your stride. You've figured out kind of the key levers. You figured out what's going to move the needle, what will have the greatest impact in what I'm trying to do. The upper end of that S is really when you excel. You've really built that competency, which is fantastic because you're hitting your strides there. But it's also, I tell people, draw a little caution flag there because you also have a tendency to become complacent. Have you seen a lot of leaders who've done the same job for a while try to wing it, right? Don't do that. The older we get, the more comfortable we get, the more like, you know what, I can just show up. Well, you're not showing up at your best. The very top of the S curve is actually a plateau. You've reached, and I think it was Jeff Casale who said the arc of every job is about 3 to 5 years, right? 3 to 5 years, you figure the job out. And if you don't find a way to either shock some excitement and some interest and passion and light a fire in you at that level, you're going to move to the next one, which is unfortunately a decline. You know it. I know it. Everybody around you knows it because it shows up. It shows up in how you show up. So this idea of nonlinear growth is about that personal reinvention. I'm proactively thinking about, am I bored? Am I doing the same thing? And like you said before, I'd rather deal with the devil I know versus the devil I don't know. Mm-hmm. Ideally, it's in the same organization. But if I don't have an opportunity to learn and grow as a leader, maybe it is time to look elsewhere. But you need to be that CEO. You need to think about your career as a project and proactively nurture it.
Yep. Just thinking with the, CROs, I don't know what the exact stat is, but I've seen things between, 12 and 18 months is the tenure. So, you barely have time to, get the cup of coffee and all of a sudden then, there's, major pressure for reasons that, may or may not make sense there. Right.
No question. And by the way, how can I anticipate that more effectively? How do I not rest on my past capabilities? And this is the real opportunity, Randy, with this global pandemic, beyond the lives and the livelihoods that it's impacted, what capabilities do you need differently in the post-pandemic world? And how can you invest in learning? Whether you're a CRO or a BDR, I'm indifferent. My supposition is on the other side of this, from hybrid relationships to doubling down on digital to RevOps that you and I have talked to several of us about, you better get your arms around a very different world on the other side of this than I think the one that we're used to.
Yeah. Now, can you talk about an organization's value agenda and how that's relevant to your own kind of personal growth journey?
Sure. So as you may recall, I spent a number of years at a private equity firm. And at Pequot Capital, we bought and sold 110 different companies in 6 years. Any financial investor, and for those of our audience that work for startups or deal with VCs or private equity boards, you're absolutely going to get this. They're investing in an undervalued asset, right? I'm buying this at X. We're going to make some changes to it. We're going to make some investments. I'm looking for that upside. That upside could be linear, right? We're going to grow by X, or it could be exponential. That exponential growth, that exponential multiple, that high-end value should be the value agenda. In essence, how do we drive that upside growth? How do we drive and realize that upside value? Great. Once you have that, as I alluded to earlier, I'm working my way backwards. You and I know the best teams win. So what roles, what jobs need to be done to drive that upside value? And saying this respectfully, it may not be your 3 VPs. It's probably that rep or that team that's dealing with that one small market segment that is untapped, or somebody who's selling one application or one feature. Or I just talked to Keegan Riley, who's going to be our next guest. Yeah. And he's talking about this brand new platform shift that I'm not sure how many people have heard of. And I think he's at Sysdig. That's an example of, look, there's enormous upside in that business, right? So how do we align our talent to that upside value And then how do we de-risk it? And de-risking is all about, and you've got a recruiting business, you know this entirely too well. Do we have the right person in the right job, focused on the right priorities, with the right resources to execute? That's how you align talent to that upside value creation.
Yep. Absolutely. I just was thinking back, old school example, but Dick Eaton's wife, Maureen, was our receptionist back at EMC in the early days. And so the kind of excitement that she would bring to anybody coming in, whether it was a candidate or a customer, and then conversely, if it was a candidate, being able to inspect and see what that person is. And maybe today that might be more relevant, post-COVID for maybe executive briefing centers, right? You've got that, what is that first touch point when the person comes out of the car or limo and they're there, and is that person excited to see them? Are they getting them coffee? I mean, it's that first, almost like that first handshake, right? So, what does that person do for the value agenda of the company and really set the tone for the day, coming in as well as then leaving, right?
And by the way, most people make up the first impression the first 6 to 10 seconds.
Right.
They'll spend the next 10 minutes reinforcing that.
Yep.
So what is that impression you're leaving in person or online? And you're exactly right. What is that value agenda for the organization? What are the jobs to be done? So we ensure not just good. By the way, that's one of my suppositions. On the other side of this pandemic, good is the enemy, right? Good enough is the enemy, because that's not going to do. People are going to have much higher expectations of you, your team, your brand, your organization. Wait a minute. I can get on Amazon and order something and have it delivered this afternoon. What do you mean it's going to take you 3 weeks? Right? So our expectations as consumers are constantly level setting what we expect from businesses we work with.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, and I know you agree, but whether the old days when you shake somebody's hand, or even if you're on a Zoom, how you doing? I'm on Zoom with different clients and people say, okay, good, or okay, or, geez, my dog ate my couch, or whatever. I'm like, okay, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's, how you doing? Great. I'm great. So that was the person on the other side that you're selling to. Okay, hey, this is a winner. I'm excited. It's good. People are on these melancholy Zooms all day long, right? So what's that excitement and passion that you can do to fire somebody up, as you said, in the first 6 to 10 seconds when they're making the judgment call on you, right?
It's infectious, right? So you and I show up, hi, it's good to be with you today. We would lose people at hello, right? So if you don't bring that energy, if you don't bring that conviction, if you don't bring that, again, in our world, professional polish, right? But you have to bring that energy. So I'd coach people, stand up, right? You're going to be a lot more energetic, engaging people. Look through the camera. It doesn't matter the rest of where stuff is. I'm amazed 14 months into this thing, and you're still looking at people's laptops up their nostrils, right? Or the lighting is behind them.
Yeah.
The light is behind them and they look like they're in the witness protection program, right? That is not helping your brand. That's not helping your digital footprint and how you show up. And people are expecting more than that, right?
Yeah.
So I think we got a couple of questions. You want to take one from Tucker?
Oh, sure. All right, Tucker, thanks. What is one's personal, you touch on this a little bit, but talk about the personal market value and some of its key attributes.
Tucker, great question. So the way we know our worth in contributing to our organizations typically has been, if you think of Randy's recruiting business, hey, what's the going rate for a CRO to a BDR? There's a base, there's upside performance. That's great. I believe that should be one data point. What I came up with in this book was, if you think about your journey from now to next, and Randy, you and I have hosted other, sales executives, and we've had people jump in. I'm a BDR. I want to become a CRO. How do I do that? Right? That's an example of your journey from now to next, or a CRO who wants to be more strategic and maybe take on a COO or CEO role. We've had several of those guests. If you think of that journey, I would submit that there's 3 buckets you got to think of. There's a personal foundation, which are your set of beliefs. There are things you are almost like table stakes. It's your educational background. It's your professional pedigree. If Randy isn't married to Janet and doesn't have a happy home life, he's probably not going to be a very productive, right, leader at work. You kind of see the friction, right? Mm-hmm. Conversely, if he hates his job, he's not going to go home and be go lucky, right? So that personal foundation has got to be set. The next level I'll call value accelerants. So what are some of the things, like your financial acumen, you've got to know the numbers. You've got to know what levers, right? In a functional role, you'd be a P&L leader, but understand what facets of that P&L will heavily impact and what levers you can effectively work. There's also things like your brand. We talked a little about this, how you show up. Are you showing up consistently? I'm coaching a leader who I asked them, and this would be a good exercise for the audience, what are 2 or 3 brand attributes that you want to be known for? And he said something like compassionate. I'm like, well, that's great, but it can't just be a mantra. What are you doing to live that every day?
Right.
How are you showing up so people say, yep, Randy Seidl is a compassionate leader? It's because you witness that. You see that every day. Tucker, the last part of these rings, I call your growth enablers. And this is about resilience. This is about relevance. This is about that personal S-curve. So what we've actually done is we've quantified what I believe is your personal market value today. And in that journey, in the book, I talk about this, that journey from now to next. If you want to get to a higher level of value creation, what are you doing to invest in some of these attributes to raise the bar on your skill, on your knowledge and capabilities? Most importantly, as you go up the ladder in your behaviors. So that's what the personal market value is about.
Yeah, that's great. Really good. So we're getting some good questions and comments here.
You want to go to Jesse next?
Sure. Jesse, what's the most important relationship of your career?
Jesse, that's a great question. I would say those who demonstrate, not just talk about it, but demonstrate a vested interest in your success. And I got to tell you, I think the whole influencer world is setting a bad precedent because they measure how many. I've got millions of people following me. Okay. How many of those are real, right? How many of those know and know you? And Randy can attest to this. Here's one of my favorite exercises for everybody listening. Export your LinkedIn contacts. You can actually do that, right? You can export your LinkedIn contacts into a spreadsheet. I want you to look at that spreadsheet and ask yourself one question. Do you know any of these people? Because garbage in, garbage stays. We're all very good at collecting. You remember collecting business cards, right? We would collect stack and stack of business cards, but you wouldn't know anything about these people. So I actually believe in, believe it or not, fewer. I'd rather focus on fewer, more meaningful, more strategic, more authentic, more value-based, more impactful relationships than a whole lot of people who don't know me, who don't care about me, who wouldn't care if I showed up or not. So we all want more, and that's admirable. When it comes to your relationships, at the risk of never being invited back, I'm trying to tell you, fewer, more authentic, because most everybody also has a BS radar, and they'll see right through that when you're not being authentic. So focus on fewer relationships where you really are creating great value through, Jesse, and you create great impact together. Randy, you live this stuff. Does that make sense? Does that resonate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love the aspect of those that take interest in your career, that are willing to give the time and answer questions, give and get feedback.
So I make sure I never, ever waste those, right? Yeah. Time is everybody's biggest asset and their enemy, right? If you think of, we've had, and Peter is kind enough to jump in, we've had Peter Bell, and we've had, Peter McKay, and a lot of these very, Bill Hogan and Frank Roush and Ken Growe. We've had some very successful executives in this podcast and these live streams. They're busy. So you don't ever want to waste the time and the bandwidth of somebody who's going to take that time to invest in you.
Right. And then, the problem is once you start listing some off, then you end up upsetting the people that you didn't mention. So you got to be careful there. So speaking of time, so Peter had a great comment. You guys rock. So I love that. Then you maybe want to post his other question.
Yeah. So here you go.
What's the most important things you should do in your first 100 days as a new employee to get off to an awesome start? I'll take a first pass at this, and this is probably more relevant in the sales area, but I call them, fast start plans. There's a great book. I think it's the first 90 days or the first 100 days, but kind of get agreement, whether you're an individual contributor or, when I would go into my last executive job at HP working for Donatelli, I have my own 30, 60, 90-day plan, which, by the way, I share with the team. And at a high level, usually from a management perspective, it's usually the first 30 days is assessing, second 30 days, which is, getting feedback. Second 30 days is kind of, starting to formulate some ideas. The next 90 days is kind of coming up with a plan. So that's very high level. But during that time, obviously you're talking to people, employees, customers, partners. And if you're an individual contributor, say an SDR or a rep, you're actually going in, working with, and I'd say most companies do not do this, which they should, but kind of working with your management team to say, hey, what is it that I should be doing? What are the objective metrics that I can do that then are going to yield success? It's easy to say, okay, sell $1 million, $10 million, $100,000, whatever it is. But in order to do that, there's a lot of things that go into that, which is a different, longer story. But, too many times, companies will hire people, and then after a year or two, okay, we're going to, they're not working out. I would argue if you have a tight 30, 60, 90-day plan, at the end of 90 days or before, you're going to know that they're not working out. And that template provides a good framework to be able to give coaching so the person knows what they need to do, because too often management doesn't direct them. So I could talk forever about it. So anyway, that's one perspective. How would you answer it?
So I go both for you and Peter. I think you'd be shocked if I didn't bring the relationship lens to this question. So Peter, I've been a part of a lot of different teams, and every facet of what Randy mentioned is critical. I tend to focus on relationships, right? External, internal, who are beyond my product, beyond my service, beyond my talent, who are the relationships both within the organization as well as external to it, that I can prioritize, I can focus on, and I can invest in, that will accelerate my ability to get things done. So you throw enough time, effort, resources at any challenge, any opportunity, you'll eventually get there. One of the biggest untapped value of business relationships is the accelerant, time to cash, time to results, time. If I focus on these 5 relationships inside, I've got my finger on the pulse of what's happening. If I get out of the office and go see these 5 customers, I can get a pretty good glimpse of what we're doing, what we're not doing. If I spend time on these 5 competitors, I'll understand where we're strong, where we're potentially weak. Here are my 5 channel partners that are going to make or break my success, right? So I tend to focus on, and both you and Peter would appreciate this. When this pandemic hit at the onset of it, I made a list of my top 100 business relationships. And I literally went down the list. Doesn't mean other ones are not important or valuable to me. Human nature. Sociologists tell us that an average individual can proactively manage about 100 to 150 relationships. So $1 million question is which ones? And if you can't invest in everybody equally, how will you prioritize which ones you're going to focus on? And by the way, those phone calls weren't to sell anybody anything. It was just, how you doing? And what are you seeing? And what's going on with you? And what's working and what's not? And what happens is you become a purveyor of relationships. And if your relationships are diverse enough to get that lens, get that perspective from different industries, you hear how this pandemic is impacting manufacturing, and you hear how it's impacting supply chain and retail and healthcare and tech sales, and in New York, as it is in San Francisco, as it is in Sao Paulo.
Right.
And you get a glimpse into the exact same scenario from very different walks of life. So, Peter, coming back full circle, I've always kind of imagine a mind map of the most valuable relationships I have, I need. Where do I need to connect the dots to accelerate getting a few things done to really get then wind in my sail?
Yeah. Great perspectives for sure. And just was thinking kind of my COVID moment was, at your urging, hey, talk to some of those relationships, which I ended up doing, which ended up in the creation of Sales Community, which Peter Bell, was a big aha. He said, you do a lot with CIOs and CTOs, which is nice. That's good. But it's the, CROs and the sales executives that you have the best relationship with, that the best. And that was a monster aha. And then I said, okay, let me go talk to them. So during the summer, I talked to 200 plus, of which 240 of them are in my advisory board for Sales Community. And that's just so enjoyable, just talking and reconnecting and listening to their feedback to come up with ways that you can kind of add value to them and their teams. And just such a great exercise on the ones that you know. And then interestingly enough, on the other side, for ones I didn't quite know, through LinkedIn, which I think now people are using LinkedIn, more and more, even more so than email, because these days with email, who knows if it actually gets there. But kind of was just doing some check-in calls with some CIOs or CTOs. I thought, oh, there's no way they're going to remember me. And you get these nice personalized notes back. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So then that's a way to kind of beef up maybe your back, your back end, or maybe bring people that were off the radar to kind of maybe that middle 100 or 200. But anyway,
two great points here. Two great points. In over 100 interviews, executive interviews for this book, Randy, I asked people, is there a common thread between those that have been curve benders in your life? And the single consistent trait that I heard over and over again is that they saw the best version of me. So it took a Peter Bell to tell you, more sales professionals and sales leaders than anybody else. I think most of us know. So why wouldn't you focus on that, right? So they see the ingredients, they see this latent value or latent potential in us when we may not see it ourselves. And they nudge us, they push us in a kind and gentle, still firm way of, you've got more potential than you're showing. You've got more upside than you're demonstrating. That's one. Two, you brought up a great point. True relationships don't really fade. They may grow some dust or cobweb, but even that CIO you haven't talked to in a while, if they had a good experience with you, if you've built a positive, constructive brand as a leader, they'll remember you. They'll remember you and they'll respond. And the other thing that I think I've said this to you, you do this almost like subconsciously. You do this as a part of your DNA, which is you add value to every interaction. You add value to every conversation. You connect people. Nour, we've done this, right? We have talked. You should go talk to these 3 people and send me an email about these 4 people. And right, you connect those dots, which I'm telling you is a superpower. That if more people did that, you would actually deposit more what I call relationship currency in more of your relationships, and really by doing that, raise the bar, raise the perceived value that others have when they hear from you, when they look forward to hearing from you.
Gotcha. Thanks. I just put it in the bucket as, giving back to I forgot exactly, but where much has been given, much is expected to give back. But anyway,
absolutely.
And what about, want to put up Mike Katoya's?
Mike Katoya, yeah. So
great comment. He's CEO Tech Target, has been doing an amazing job. And so proud of everything he's been doing. So great question. How do we remain relevant? Great question that we all need to focus on.
That's exactly right. And as Mike, I think, is thinking about this as well, which is exactly the point of me asking the question in the book. It's not a point in time. It's not just getting relevant or becoming relevant. It's remaining relevant. Right. So think about how many organizations, shockingly, were not a video culture pre-pandemic. Overnight, they all got thrown into, you better figure out Zoom or Teams or Blue Jeans or Skype or some other way, because we're not going to be able to get together through physical proximity. So overnight, leaders led daily huddles and they got their teams together. And I don't know how to figure out the Zoom thing either, but we'll figure it out together. So, and again, you and I see this in RevOps, right? It wasn't a thing when you and I were selling, right? Here's a call sheet, go for it. Now, enormous amount of brilliant technologies that really document and capture and provide insights at each step of that buyer's journey. We better figure out how to embrace that and continue to learn and adapt to those changing environments. So Mike's got a great point. How do we remain relevant? How do we accelerate? That's actually the next book I'm thinking of, is accelerating your relevance. And my very biased opinion is a few of your most valuable relationships are your best way of doing that.
Interesting. And then Robert Ocho says the experience matters most. And he's had a great run at Apple, so I'm sure he's continuing to get great experiences. But it's a lot of it you got to learn, right? You can't get it in a book. You got to have the MBAs, whatever, are nice, but it's kind of, in the streets, in the companies, making mistakes, watching others, and, learning that way, right?
I still remember windshield time, right? I still remember some of the best lessons I learned in my sales management, sales leadership career was one-on-one with those leaders that we modeled, we revered, we wanted to be like them. And when they took us under their wings and taught us not just how to do the job, but how to really elevate our perspective, our lens, how to look at that talent differently, how to bring others in and really nurture their growth. Again, you and I've talked about one of the biggest jobs. I believe the corner office has 2 roles and 2 roles only. You ready for this? Number 1, brand. Number 2, culture. What's the brand that you want to convey? What's the unique value that you, your organization, your team brings? And that culture is your delivery engine. That culture is the team that's going to take your brand promise to the market and create brand equity. And last time I checked, that brand equity directly relates to enterprise value, right? Yep. So what are you doing to focus on those two? And Robert is right. That experience in the organization, the employee experience, the sales team, the sales customer success team, the technical team, the channel team, their experience matters as much as the experience we all create for customers.
Yep, absolutely. And want to encourage other people asking questions, which is great. And we got one from Bob, looks like. From a sales perspective, what are your thoughts on using your time on low-hanging small fruit versus big elephant payoffs? Do you have a rule of thumb on time spent, efforts, et cetera? So from a sales perspective, I'll maybe start off. It depends. Ideally, you've got the kind of big game hunting type reps and territories where you may not get paid off with actual sales, but there could be some MBO metrics. And then you kind of go down into maybe an enterprise and a commercial where those are kind of more singles, doubles. But I think to your question, say if you've got a territory like the New England as an example, okay, you've got some large companies that you can go after, you've got some medium, some small ones. And I guess the trick would be maybe a baseball analogy, which is, hey, you can't go for a home run all the time because you're only going to hit maybe a handful of that in a season. But you want to mix in singles and doubles and everything else. So I would think it's probably a balancing act between number one, kind of what's the value prop, what's the right sweet spot for you to sell to, what are the right accounts, what's the right messaging, what's the right personas at those companies, and what are you doing there? What is marketing doing to support you or not support you in those initiatives? Is probably a whole another topic. But then say, okay, you're going to be spending time at all those different types, so then you can kind of pay the bills on some of the smaller deals, but then you get those home run deals over the top that get you to kind of 2x or 3x your quota. What would you say, Nour?
So I'm actually working with a couple of teams, Randy, in focusing their relationships on those target size businesses, right? So traditionally we've said SMB or major accounts and global accounts, and I've always believed, and I know you do as well, the size of the organization, the complexity of the organization, the complexity of the relationship, they have very different needs. And it's very challenging for the same rep to go after a mom and pop one day and, Ford Motor Company the next day, right? So we're creating these relationship-centric teams. Think of them as hubs that really focus on the needs of that relationship, the needs of that customer. What do they need from us? And then I'm also a realist. How do we reduce the cost of that acquisition? Should we do that inside? Yeah. Should we do that through a website? Well, you know what? This is more of an enterprise sale. This is going to be much more complicated or complex, and we got to do proof of concepts and bring teams together. So Bob, it's less of the low-hanging fruit versus the elephant. I would say think of the relationship and what do they need, and how do you bring the right resources at the right time to really help them buy. I've always been a big believer of really understand how they buy, what they need, at what stage of their buying, and really help them buy. And you do that, as Randy alluded to, you'll have a good balance between small, medium, large size deals, but also short, medium, longer term opportunities. And that really builds a really healthy pipeline of opportunities.
Yep, for sure. So great question, Bob. Thanks. So Nour, what about talking about relational on-ramps and relational growth boosts?
Sure. So one of the lessons we've learned in this pandemic, it's very difficult, Randy, I think, to create new relationships purely through these square boxes, right? So if you're Oracle, if you're Dell, if you're HP, if you're those big brands, you don't have to tell anybody who, right? That's safety, that there's brand equity there. They kind of know who you are and what you're about, and you're not going to go away. Smaller entities, I think of some of the startups, I think of some of the lesser known brands. So I'm a big believer of never use, but how do I leverage an existing relationship? Word of mouth still is incredibly powerful. How can I find relationships like Randy Seidl and say, could you help me? Could you be kind enough to help me? Even when he makes an introduction, I've got to arm him with the ammunition, do that intelligently. Number two, I may get at bat, I may get in the door, but I have to be able to stand on my own 2 feet.
Right. Yeah.
So relational on-ramp may get you there, but you better be able to deliver that value and really ensure that they're better off because they're in a relationship with you once you get that at bat. Yeah. The boost is really relationships that dramatically accelerate your time to traction, your time. So if a project, initiative, deal may take you 6 to 9 months, I'm always back to a question Peter Bell asked. I'm always asking, are there relationships that can help me get there in half the time? Are there, Randy, you know executives who can make one phone call, send one email, make one introduction. Here's a board member of another company where you made a huge difference who makes an introduction to another CEO. You've just shaved months and all kinds of cycles off of your own efforts to just get in the door and get that audience. So I'm blessed. A lot of my business, Randy, probably like yours, comes from referrals, comes from relationships, comes from where you've created great impact before. I call those relationship boosts. And those are great ways to kind of give you a jump start, give you almost like a force, tailwind to push you through all the social proof stages that most others need to kind of get through.
Yep, absolutely. And then just getting back to more the true spirit of, curve benders. Can you talk about the 7 steps?
Yeah. So this is a great question. So whenever I tell people that curve benders are these relationships that dramatically accelerate our reinvention, our growth, and have a profound impact on us. Randy, the logical question is, okay, who are they? Where are these magical, mystical creatures? Where do I find them? Who are they? So I said, I'm a blueprint guy. I like roadmaps. I like steps. So I came up with 7 steps. And again, this is from our research. This is from our interviews that none of us have a crystal ball. And you and I talked about this in the podcast. You're not going to know that relationship is a curve bender out of the gate. It's through multiple interactions. It's through that relational cadence that you start to see that they demonstrate a vested interest in your success. So you have to start. There's a reason the airline safety videos tell us to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first before we help others. You got to start with a healthy self. So I talk about step 1 is a personal foundation. Do you have that growth mindset? Do you have that digital, that entrepreneurial mindset? 2 is a professional commitment, committing, showing up every day. When you look in that mirror asking, am I willing to do the incredibly difficult work to be world-class today? If not, for sake of all of us, please go do something else. Yeah. Because if you're not willing to do that, you're going to show up halfway and everybody's going to see it. And as I said earlier, I think mediocre is the enemy in the post-pandemic world, right? So that commitment, professional commitment to be your best. Number 3, catalyst. I'm going to take you back to your first chemistry class. If you remember catalyst, it was something that created a chemical reaction. Something happens within us that says, I want more. I want a higher role. I want a bigger impact. I want to go do more than what I'm doing today. And that's not just professional. That's not just more money. I want to go make a bigger impact like you do. Like what did Bill Hogan do with the St. Baldrick's? Like they shaved their head to raise money for kids' cancer. That's that catalyst that says, I want to do more. That will lead you to something I call immersive inquiry. You jump in both feet to really learn as much as you can about the space. So if I want to go really succeed in the security space, how do I go build that security DNA? How do I go build that cloud security DNA? How do I go build that developer first? We talked to Ed Sim and Peter McKay and a lot of those folks that are focusing on the developer space. But you immerse yourself in that space. Only then will you start to identify what I'll call your watering hole. Who are those other relationships that hang out in that space, right? They all know each other. And when you start to meet them and you start to execute on your plan, on your growth, they start to notice. So Nour not just took that advice, but he implemented it. And now he's coming back to show Seidl the progress I've made. And that's that connection cadence that will keep the relationship moving forward. So that's the 7th step to you meeting potential curve benders.
Wow. Awesome. And then looks like Tucker has a note, and thank you, Bill Eben, for saying thank you. Great advice. And Paul Fracklis, a longtime childhood friend. Outstanding insights, Dave and Randy. Energizing. Awesome.
So anyway, we want to take the question from Tucker.
Tucker, sure. All right, Tucker. Nour, I'm a big fan of your use of the term fender benders. Can you talk more about what exactly that is and how you find and disengage them? Hopefully not in a motorcycle sense.
Not in a motorcycle sense. So, Randy, I got to tell you, I am not often surprised, but it's delightful when I am in terms of researching a book or a concept. So, as you heard in our discussions, I've always put curve benders in this great light, right? They're people that bolster us up. They move us to a different level, right? They're positive. They're constructive. In one interview, I asked somebody who was a curve bender, and they basically described somebody who bankrupted them, who literally took them in the wrong direction, who, led them to reaching their bottom. And I said, no, that's not a curve bender. And they said, no, it really was. Because that person, because of that experience, I am now better off. I went a different route. I was bankrupt. I had nothing. And I morally, financially, whatever. And I changed my direction and destination. So I said, I don't want to call those people curve benders. So I call them fender benders. And if you think about it, it's one of the pains in our lives. If you've ever had a fender bender between the insurance and the repairs and the rental car and the disruption to your schedule and your agenda. So what I said in the book, and I appreciate Tucker bringing that up, it's you got to figure out. And they do this, you kind of see, and you've seen these signals, right? They don't follow up. They've got an idea a minute. They're not really that authentic. There's not a lot of depth. You start to peel back the onion, and you hear a lot of sizzle, but there's no steak, right? So learn how to detect. I've always believed the view is nicer when you take the high road. So take the high road, but you've got to detect. More importantly, you've got to disengage. Because there's an inherent opportunity cost in relationships. If I'm wasting cycles over here, I'm not spending time, effort, resources with relationships that are going to move me forward, bolster my success, really get me to a different area. So fender benders are relationships that take you in the exact opposite direction that you want to avoid at all costs possible.
There you go. Good. Good, obvious insights. Now, you also touch on in the book talking about the organization of the future. So how do you see that kind of evolving out?
Yeah, you know that a lot of my clients are these marquee brands and very mature companies in mature industries, right? And Randy, I think a lot, like number of them you've worked for, certainly a number of them you've seen, they've figured out that perfect execution box, right? They know what works. We make this stuff, we sell the stuff, this is how we do it. We've got it like clockwork. So I jokingly call my friends who are general counsel, chief compliance, chief legal officers, right? I call them oncologists because their job is any shiny new idea in the company, dig it out and kill it, right? And rightfully so. Their job is to protect that perfect execution box. Yeah. As such, I believe real innovation is very difficult for mature companies in mature industries. Now, they can innovate products. They can even innovate services. The biggest potential disruption to every organization, every company, is actually business model disruption. Think of Airbnb against Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt. Think of Uber against all the taxis and that whole business, right? It's a business model disruption that can potentially disrupt you. So what I've written in the book about a whole chapter on organization of the future, and the premise is real innovation, not innovation theater, not lipstick on a pig, not everybody's pet project, but real innovation needs to be structurally, physically, away from that core. Do not distract the sales force. Do not distract the core business. God bless the core business. It pays your salary and my fees. Let them focus on the core. Think of a sandbox engine away from the organization to go like a VC or a private equity firm and make 10 bets, knowing 8 will go nowhere, but the 2 that hit are going to be the future of our business. And I'm actually working with a couple of clients on this idea, and we're helping them recruit chief entrepreneurs. So where the CEO is focused on the core business, this new role of a chief entrepreneur is focused on, let's find ways to disrupt ourselves before somebody else disrupts us.
And I assume that person would have especially for a larger company, more of a non-traditional background from what they'd usually hire, right?
Unequivocally, yes. As a matter of fact, the prerequisite is they've built and scaled an early stage company. They've raised multiple rounds of capital. They've had both ideally financial, but also strategic exit. So they know how to scale ideas. And what I'm coaching these large, mature companies to do is, listen, Walmart had a chance to invest in Amazon. And their investment back then, today, would be worth more than the entire market cap of Walmart. Last time I checked, a slice of a watermelon will always be bigger than the whole grape. Go look for opportunities where you can invest in that next generation of your retail business, the next generation of your manufacturing business, the next generation of your technology, and really nurture that away from your core and let it scale. But you're exactly right. That chief entrepreneur has built and scaled successfully a business, and they know how to either assimilate it back into the core or spin it off, divest it, or let it thrive as an independent entity.
I assume it's a longer answer, but I could just see the culture just totally destroying, just what you're saying, right? You can just see the movie, right? Just gonna the company and everybody will just totally reject those antibodies. given a COVID analogy, right?
You're exactly right. So this isn't try to hide anything from anybody, but a lot of our sandbox engine initiatives are clandestine. They're under the radar. They're on a need to know basis, and a whole lot of people don't need to know. And it's not trying to hide anything, just giving that idea a chance to get out of the ground, get out of the gate, go gain some critical mass. And I want to give you and your audience a couple of data points. Korn Ferry points to average tenure of a CEO to be 6.5 years. Conversely, you and I know it takes an average startup, 10, 12 years to gain critical traction, critical mass. So they're, by definition, any real business model innovation is going to outlive most CEOs. So if we have it separate from the existing entity, it has a much better chance of surviving and really thriving and becoming a big part of the organization's success.
Wow. So just looking behind you there, it's a little blurry, but the strategy visualization, the visualization boards that I love. Can you talking about big complicated companies and businesses? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. You'd love this story. I distinctly remember a CEO of, let's see, 8 billion in revenue, 15,000 employees, sending me a 44-page PowerPoint on their strategy. We've since become really good friends. I called him. I said, John, I'm on slide 6, and I don't understand where we're going, what are we doing, or how we're going to get there. So he says, okay, smart guy, what do you think's the answer? I said, what if it was 1 page? So there is no way. Our business is way too complicated, and we have divisions and business units and different go-to-market strategies for, let me know if any of this sounds familiar, right? We have all these different initiatives going on. Hey, there's no way. I said, humor me. What if we could? So we call this strategy visualization. I actually share several examples in the book where we take the essence of your story. I have a brilliant creative director. Lynn Wilson also illustrated the cover of the book and a lot of the illustrations, all the illustrations that are on the inside of it. And we take the essence of your story and we create these 1-page visuals. They're not clip arts. These are custom illustrations. And particularly in time of uncertainty, particularly in the post-pandemic world where your focus matters more than ever before. I don't think you or your audience would be surprised to hear we've done over 100 of these projects. I'm on my 6th project at Humana. We've done this at Cipla, India's biggest pharmaceutical company. We just finished a project at Schneider Electric. We've done work at Siemens and Disney and Tupperware. So and you're going to love this. I recently heard somebody else say this, and man, does it resonate. Those who use PowerPoint as a crutch have neither power or point.
Yep.
So instead of death by PowerPoint, instead of beating people over the head with, let me tell you how great our story is, what if we created a canvas? What if we created a visual that invited others into the conversation, that co-creates, that jointly develops, here's where we're going, here's how we're going to get there together.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just kind of laughing, but rest in peace, Mark Hurd used to say that. He'd ask questions, then people would come and pull out their decks and all that. And, fortunately I wasn't good enough with the deck, so I'd have to kind of just talk. And everybody said, geez, you don't have it in your arsenal, but you know it. Geez, how's that work? And then if you don't know it, you don't know it. Right.
By the way, the whole Amazon 6-page memo culture, right? Bezos is famous for saying, I don't want to see PowerPoints. We don't do PowerPoints. Tell a story. And if you can't, and we're going to sit and read those 6 pages together, and we're going to discuss it. If it's important enough, make the time to create that 6. But so I believe, and we talk a lot about this in my coaching, visual storytelling is a new leadership competency. And if you can articulate, here's where we're going, here's how we're going to get there, you're going to get buy in on that vision, on that direction, on those set of strategic priorities.
Yeah. And I'd also say the same thing applies as you talk about other accounts, right? So if you're in a sales situation, hey, tell me the story about XYZ opportunity. What'd you do? How'd you do it? How do you help them? Kind of that art, which, seems to have gotten lost over the years, is, I think, all the more vital, especially in the Zoom day and age, right?
Right. Unequivocally, yes. Have you seen some organizations measure the quality of their presentation by its weight? Right. Versus less is more. If you, again, Donald Miller's famous for saying, if you confuse, you lose. So if I've got a Zoom meeting and I really have only about 15 minutes to grab their attention, do you want to talk them to death or show them a bunch of PowerPoints, or you want to walk them through a visual story? And by the way, these are less about you, more about how is that recipient of that value better off because of you.
Totally. Absolutely. And we're almost top of the hour. So maybe one more question from Tucker.
There we go. I like Tucker jumping in. Appreciate you.
All right. I've got one more for you, Nour. This is great intel on finding and leveraging curve benders. So now how can you become a curve bender in the lives of others?
Tucker, I love that question. And I got to tell you, it's one of the profound ones that I stumbled on in my research and my interviews. You're exactly right. When I tell people, these curve benders can profoundly change your direction, your destination, everybody wants to know, how do I find them? Where do I meet them? Can I meet one this afternoon? Because I've got an important meeting tomorrow. A much more profound question is, Tucker, exactly what you're asking. How do we become curve benders in lives of others? Number one, you have to care. You have to genuinely care. And it shows in how you show up. Number two, you cannot do this for everybody. So pick a few people where your values are aligned, where they demonstrate that integrity, that drive, that initiative. You see the ingredients, you see the potential, you see what they can become. And Tucker, take them under your wings. And one of the things I struggle with is Randy, you and I hear a lot, when I become successful, when I become a CRO, I'll mentor a whole bunch of people. None of us are too young or too old to find mentors or become one. And that's really a great first step, is take a few people under your wings and teach them not just how to be great sales reps, managers, or leaders, but how to become better human beings.
Yep, that's great. So just wrapping up, John Cotter has a great comment. So thank you, John. Great advice on the virtual storyboard. Some of my best sales calls were with a placemat versus a PowerPoint. Love it. So in conclusion, not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure any of the folks that are on here, if they would send their address, we might send some of them a book.
We're getting some signed books out to friends of the sales community.
All right. So anybody, make it easy. My email is randy@salescommunity.com. If you want to book, send me your address, and I'll make sure Nour gets it to you, and maybe he'd even sign it for you. And for those that are members of Sales Community, thank you so much. For those that aren't, we have what I call a no-brainer 30-day free trial. You can just go to salescommunity.com. Tons of great content, webinars, ideas, kind of learn more so you can sell more. Individual contributor on up to CROs or CEOs. And Nour, thank you so much. I'll let you close it out.
Seidl, thanks for having me. I just want to remind the audience, beyond your educational foundation and your professional pedigree, your biggest asset is your portfolio of relationships. Invest in them wisely. On behalf of Randy, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, Nour. Thanks, everybody, for participating.